TVW coverage is gavel to gavel.
Sine die.
Start to finish and unedited. Catch up with what's happening in state government and public policy with our Gavel to Gavel hearing of the week. Every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. on TVW. Watch all of TVW's award-winning shows on your time at tvw.org.
We're hoping we can get a sizable population in each area within 3 years.
We're always on edge, hoping that whenever the next storm rolls through, that lightning doesn't strike in our area to burn down more habitat.
I'm born right here in Washington State, Tacoma, Washington, actually a block away from where we're sitting right now.
TVW's Washington to Washington Blake Decision episode has won the NATOA Award of Excellence.
Tacoma was a lot different then. It was on the precipice of thriving. And then crack cold.
To our Republican media availability. With us today from the House Republican Caucus, we have House Republican Deputy Leader Chris Corey of the 15th District and House Republican Caucus Chair Peter Obarno from the 20th District. And from the Senate Republican Caucus, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun of the 20th District and Senator Perry Dozier, Ranking Republican on the Senate Business, Financial Services, and Trade Committee from the 16th District. And with that, I will turn it over to Representative Obarno for some opening remarks.
Thanks, John. Okay, so thank you. We are in the middle of week 5, and we continue to hear about budget crisis. I would argue and say that it's less of a budget crisis and more of a priorities crisis. House Republicans, at least from our standpoint, keep advancing policies that make neighborhoods safer, kitchen table costs less, and really trying to focus on the things that our communities sent us here to do. I think we're starting to see the real contrast between both the House Democrats and House Republicans on a number of different issues. The one that's getting probably the most attention, which Senator Braun will probably talk about since he's on national TV talking about it, which is the parental rights bill. One that I think all our communities, at least the vast majority of the communities throughout Washington State, want to make sure that parents are part of a safe and supportive public education system. And 1296, at least on the House side, is a piece of legislation that tries to box out parents. And then you're seeing the same thing, whether it's through public safety and civil rights and judiciary, a lot of the same policies that are kind of rearing their heads again. Bills that, reduce crime or reduce penalties for serious criminals committing crimes around schools, for instance, or releasing criminals on the streets early versus, I think, the House Republicans, which are taking the stance that we need to, choose victims over criminals and make sure that our neighborhoods are safe. And then, another real stark contrast we're seeing coming out in week, 4 and into week 5 is, we hear about budget crises coming from the House Democrats. However, a ton of their pieces of legislation have huge fiscal notes and don't reduce the cost of living and don't help vulnerable communities with a hand up, actually just kind of pile on layers of additional regulations and taxes that are just going to cost a lot more money. I'm sure we'll get into those with some of your questions, and Senator Braun will talk a little bit more about those. But I think week 5 is that point in a long session where you're really starting to see the stark contrast between the two caucuses, their priorities and their policies. So with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Braun.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Peter. Welcome to the week 5 Republican media availability. I think I'm just going to refocus our priorities for the session. We're focused on public safety, and it's good to see that Senator Holy's bill that would bring another $100 million to employ more officers around our state is moving forward. That's the first step, but it is a step in the right direction. A lot more work to do there on affordability, still food, housing, gas, childcare, healthcare, all a big challenge. A lot of work being done on housing. We have a pretty robust housing package in the Senate from the Senate Republicans. We're working with the chair, Senator Bateman, to get those heard. Hopefully we'll find some common ground that can move forward. At the same time, we're pushing back on the rent control bill that I believe will do much harm to investment, long-term investment in our state, and the building out of housing at the level and the rate that we need to have access and affordability for everybody. And then finally, on K-12, a lot of stuff going on there. The biggest thing that has been mentioned is this push to back up on the important parental rights initiative that was passed last year. We've had House bills moving in both the House and the Senate. In the Senate, they moved it off the floor last Wednesday. It turned into a bit of a national debate. But fundamentally, this is wrong for the simple reason that it's one more way that the majority is seeking to divide children from their parents and undermine trust in our public school system. We have a lot of talk around here about the difficulty folks are having, passing levies and bonds. I'll tell you that that's not a decline in parents supporting public education. It's just a lack of trust in the system as it's being delivered to them and their children right now. So we have a lot of work to do to make that better and build a system that will serve our children and our parents and our state like it deserves to be served and delivers the education that they're going to need to be successful later in life. So on top of that, the budget, the only thing I would say there is there's this increasing assumption, frankly, from our colleagues on the Democratic side that there's no way to solve this without taxes. Both the Senate and the House budget leaders are pretty much unequivocal at this point. They've been through 1 or 2 rounds of reviewing the budget, and they see a clear framework, and we're working on putting that together so we can release it more publicly, that you can get through this. You just without additional taxes, without putting additional stress on our economy, and without pushing more expense to the voters around the state. I remind you of the poll that came out about a week and a half ago that, where the vast majority of voters don't favor new taxes. They want us to live within our means, just like they have to. And the vast majority, I think it's 76%, understand that if there are new taxes, that will pass new cost onto them, and they just can't afford it at this point. So a lot of work to do there, but we're going to provide an option that shows the people of the state of Washington that you can run the state of Washington, you can deliver the services needed, particularly to our most vulnerable, without additional taxes. Again, thank you all for being here, and welcome your questions.
All right, we'll go to Drew Mickelson of King 5.
Good morning. Thanks for making yourselves available again. I want to talk about the two bills, one in the House, one in the Senate, to lower the threshold for bonds, school bonds, to pass. It's election day. There are a number of districts that are going to be sweating it out to see if they can get to the 60%. Any support for those bills in either of your caucuses, and explain why not, if that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, I can address that a little bit. I don't think there's a lot of support or any support in the House Republican caucus for lowering that constitutional threshold. I would point out that in the past capital budget, the capital budget committees in both the Senate and the House did extremely good work in expanding the square footage allowances, the reimbursement rates, and doing a lot on that side to make sure to help some of those local measures pass, to prove and provide, I think, some more transparency and accountability to show kind of what that state investment would be. And over the summer, the capital budget committees met quite often trying to revise how SCAP works and how we deal with distressed schools. I think the path of least resistance is, if we think this is important, then we'll invest in schools and be transparent and make sure local communities know what our state investment is, and in making sure that the children, administrators, and teachers have a safe, good place to go to school. But I don't think the path of least resistance is trying to lower that threshold in a time where there's a lot of people struggling, as well as trying to get over that constitutional threshold. We can do better at the state. We can be more transparent and invest from Olympia down. I don't think putting that pressure on folks is the right answer, and I don't think you'll get a lot of support from the House Republican caucus for that.
Yeah, I would just add, no, there's no support in the Senate Republican caucus. And I'll tell you why. It's because this is another regressive tax that the Democrats want to place on our voters. You just go look at the math. I mean, in Seattle, if they run a bond, it's 30 cents or less per thousand. If they run a bond in Peter or my neighborhood, it's going to be anywhere from $1.50 to $2.50 a thousand. This is a big deal to people's property tax bill, and it's a big deal to people who can least afford it. So the system itself, the way, and this is why we've been through first Dorn and McCleary and whatever the name of the next suit is going to be. I'm sure it's coming because we continue, we being the legislature run by the Democratic majorities, continue to rely on sources other than the state to pay for state requirements. And I understand that the court ruled last year that that we are meeting our constitutional obligation with regard to construction, but there wasn't a clear ruling. It also said that we have to do our part, and Peter did a great job of explaining the many things that have been done in the capital budget for the state to do their part. This effort to get to a less than a lower threshold to pass bonds is simply trying to push more cost back onto local voters, and in particular on poor local voters.
Yeah, and I want to add, the philosophy behind that 60% majority is because we are indebting the people, and so having a higher threshold is important, because you have to convince a majority of the people why they should bond out and be paying for future programs. This isn't, it's the same rule we have here in Olympia for ourselves when we want to do bonds. It's a higher threshold, and I think it resonates with people, and if there's good projects, they'll vote for them. I know personally in my district, we had a school bond fail because the people were upset with how previous money was spent, and so the district retooled, and actually I was part of the committee that went out and asked for 2 new elementary schools, and when the community saw what we were doing and how we were going to spend the money, they approved it. So I think having that measure is good for both the taxpayers in terms of making sure that they're not unduly added burden to them, but also for the school district so that they have to put together a real implementable plan that the community will support.
I'd also like to add in a little bit on that. I think one of the things it may lead to is putting pressure on our enrichment levies that we'll have. Because if you have both of these at a simple majority, in this climate right now with the taxing, and especially after the parental rights bill has been introduced, as Senator Braun brought it up, we have parents that are getting a little upset with what's going on with their kids at school. It's going to make it so much more difficult to pass any of these as we're proceeding forward. So I think it's something that would be taking the wrong step forward.
Did you have a follow-up, Drew?
No, thank you all.
All right. Next, we'll go to Sophia from the Seattle Times.
Hi, good morning. I was wondering, there's a House bill being heard this morning that proposes raising the statewide minimum wage to $25 an hour by 2031. Just wondering whether there's any support for that and what your thoughts are.
My caucus will not support that. It is an insane proposal, and if you listen to the residents of our districts, the small business owners, about what the burdens they're already facing, this is just untenable and will continue to hurt jobs throughout Washington State. But it's not grounded in reality, in my opinion.
Yeah, Sophia, and I will say I've gotten a lot of emails from local businesses who are very concerned about this. You know, I started off kind of talking about the fact that a lot of the pieces of legislation that House Democrats are putting forward are actually going to increase costs at the kitchen table. The answer is to start reducing those costs to make the cost of living more tenable for folks. The only thing that increasing the minimum wage does is it really puts pressures on small businesses, and then we're going to have more people unemployed, and we're going to have small businesses struggling. I think that's the wrong answer. If we're going to do anything, we should attack the cost of living by reducing taxes, reducing those burdens, reducing regulations, not just merely increasing minimum wage. I think that's just the wrong direction.
Yep.
Yeah, Peter said the right point there. Is this is about getting after cost of living? You don't fix cost of living by raising the minimum wage. You fix cost of living by driving down the cost of goods, cost of services, cost of transportation. That's the right way to make Washington livable for everybody around the state. The other thing I would say is, or two other things. One is very rarely are folks, even in our district that is not particularly affluent, are they making current minimum wage, which is one of the highest in the country? So the market is responding to the labor market, and people are making more money as a result of that. The idea of the government artificially inflating that wage to try to address the cost of living is just wrongheaded. And the last thing I'd say is I would remind you that they brought a $18 minimum wage to the ballot in California last year, and it failed. Minimum wage propositions are generally very popular at the ballot. But the notion that at $18 an hour, which is substantially lower than this bill that's being considered, and it failed in California, should give you a sense for people understanding that this isn't going to solve their economic challenges. We need to do things that bring down the cost of living, not that make things more expensive by raising the minimum wage.
Did you have a follow-up, Sophia?
No, thank you.
All right. Next, we'll go to Jeannie Lindsay.
Hello, good morning. I'm sorry, I was a couple minutes late, so I don't know if you all already addressed this, but I wanted to ask about a bill that was also getting a hearing this morning that would raise the property tax cap from 1% to inflation or no more than 3%. I know previously, when this bill has been proposed, some of you have talked about your opposition to it. I wanted to ask if you're still opposed to that, and if so, is there any version of that change that would solicit your support for that, since it's a high priority for cities and counties?
No, I don't see Senate Republicans supporting this in any measure. Look, there's a ton of pressure on homeowners and renters based on the property taxes across our state, especially in rural counties with lower assessed values, where the price per thousand is much higher to raise a smaller amount of money. So No, this is a bad idea for the state of Washington. People get that. Some folks, I mentioned earlier, probably before you got in, that folks understand that, it's like 76% in the poll from last week, understand that additional taxes pass right through to their cost of living. But they really get it when it comes to property tax, which they're either paying directly or see it as part of their rent. So people are not in the mood for more taxes. And finally, I'd say if you go back and look at the revenue growth and the budget growth for both cities and counties around our state, it's very close, in some cases higher than what we've seen at the state level, where the budget has grown by twice the rate of personal income. Imagine that. Well, we have state, cities, and counties growing their budget at twice the rate of our individual household incomes, and their solution is to raise taxes faster on the folks who are paying the bill. Doesn't make any sense, and the people are not in any mood for it.
Yeah, and this is supposedly another year of housing. They just pushed a rent control bill out of approach yesterday in the House because housing costs are out of control, and yet we're going to continue to raise property taxes when housing is already unaffordable. Those two things don't square.
Yeah. Last year I reached. Oh, I'm sorry, Rep. Barnum. Go ahead. I'll wait for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, it's harder to get rid of things and cut things than it is just to ask for more money and raise revenue sometimes. But it's definitely the wrong decision, and there's not support in the caucus for that. I will also say that there are a slew of bills on both the House and the Senate from Democrats that are increasing B&O tax and sales tax and this tax and that tax. I think sometimes when House Democrats want to raise taxes, it's easier for them to have clean hands when they push it down to the local level to let them raise the taxes. But again, we spoke about this kind of as a skipping record, though. The cost of living is too high, and folks can't afford additional taxes. And when I get messages from my community, the number one thing they're asking for is to reduce taxes, and the number one thing they want to see reduced is property taxes. So this goes against every message I'm getting throughout Southwest Washington from my community.
And I'll follow up with that a little bit. Last year when 5770 was being introduced, I reached out to a lot of the county commissioners in my district. I'm a past county commissioner, and having a little bit of knowledge of what gets passed at the state level and gets pushed down to the county, I'm a little bit sensitive to that. But one of the things about this is the county jurisdictions, those local jurisdictions have the ability to put it on the ballot and let the people vote for it. We don't need to be passing this at this level. One of the things that I've really seen is that with the appreciation of homes and land values and everything, even when I was a commissioner and we didn't take the 1/10 or the 1% increase, people would complain about my taxes going up all the time. You give the ability to keep raising them up to 3%, and this isn't the right climate to be taking more from people with the inflation and the affordability that we have in Washington State.
Did you have a follow-up, Jeannie?
Not right now. Thank you.
All right. Next, we will go to Bill from the Washington State Standard.
Thanks for checking, John. I don't have a question today.
Are you there, John? Okay, we'll come back to John. Next,
John,
we'll
I think you were on mute when you called him up.
Oh.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, this is John Stang.
Yeah.
Sort of switching focus to the national picture. Right now, we've got Nick Brown involved in at least 4 lawsuits against the Trump administration, of which 2 or 3 affect federal money coming directly to Washington State. That's part of your budget money. Now we've got J.D. Vance and Elon Musk saying if even if the feds lose in court, we're going to ignore that and just ignore the judges. And who knows whether they'll convince President Trump whether to do the same thing. 2 questions. Do you support Nick Brown's lawsuits on getting rid of the freeze on federal funding and the freeze on health research money? Are you for it or against those lawsuits? And 2, how worried are you that the Trump administration would lose in court and say, "The hell with it, we're not going to send you the money anyway"?
Well, John, you're asking us questions about which we have no control whatsoever. And we're, to a certain extent, spectators just like you and everybody else on the call. I'm not neither a lawyer nor I'm actively involved in any of these 4 lawsuits. My understanding, at least in one, had to do with the memo sent last week that froze up some funding for a short period of time. My understanding is that President Trump rescinded that memo, and there was some confusion between the memo or the executive order rather was pretty clear, but the memo from OMB was unclear, and it resulted in some confusion. So I understand they just backed up on that issue. So I'm not sure that lawsuit has any.
YouTube just rescinded the memo, but he has not rescinded the executive order, and this will directly affect your budget.
Yeah, so the parts that directly affected the budget, there was a short-term cutoff in Medicaid funding to HCA that was fixed within a few hours. I don't think there's any, and I've been talking pretty closely with the FQHCs and RHCs in my community, and I think that they're getting the drawdown. They have the same drawdown authority they have. So I don't want to get, I don't claim to be an expert, but I think there's a lot of suggestions out there that get way ahead of what the order does. I think what we've seen so far is the federal administration trying to, in a very complex situation, trying to find where there are inappropriate payments. There's a lot of reports of inappropriate payments. I think it's hard to tell exactly, candidly, I think it would be nice, and I hope that the media will do a good job of shining a light on what's real and what's not real, but right now I think it's really hard to tell. I do agree with your comment that there is a possibility that changes in the federal budgeting could have a significant impact on our budget, but I also believe that will come through Congress and not through an executive order. And I think as a state, we should be prepared for that because we have a tremendous reliance on federal money, particularly in healthcare. We need to be prepared for that and be thinking about it, especially as we work through this budget process. I'm not sure any of that will happen fast and soon enough to have an impact on the budget, but we ought to be. I hope our budget writers are thinking about that, and they recognize that they can't just tax their way out of this. We have to live within our means, and we have been over-reliant on some federal money for some time. We're going to have to address the reality eventually. I don't know when that will be. As far as whether the administration complies with a judge's order, as far as I know, they have complied with every judge's order, both in this administration and the previous administration. So I have no reason to suspect otherwise. I expect this to play out, unfortunately, for a while in the courts instead of where it should be happening, which is between Congress and the president. That's how our government is designed to work. But I get that we have 3 branches for a reason. We'll see where it goes. So bottom line, a lot going on. I don't know that we have any better insight than you do or anybody else does, but I don't think that it's the wild lawlessness that is sometimes being reported.
Yeah, I agree largely with what Senator Braun said. It's really too early to tell. A lot of this stuff is going to shake out. It's a new administration, new executive cabinet. So we'll wait and see. We'll adjust as things come. I also agree with him that this is a concern when you rely on monies that come from a source that's out of your control to do programs in your state, and we'll have to adjust accordingly. I would fully expect the Trump administration to follow the law. If are they pivoting and maybe trying to figure out ways they can do stuff in compliance? Sure. I watched the previous administration routinely say they were going to ignore the Supreme Court on things and then readjust and figure out a way to do stuff. So it's too early to tell. We're all focused here on Washington state issues and doing what we can within our area of control.
Yeah. Representative Corey reminded me, what do we have, 3 different attempts by the previous administration to find new ways to pay down student loans in spite of court rulings? I mean, are they going to adjust their legal strategy? Possibly, but I'm not sure how you make the case that's any different than what we saw in the previous administration.
So you're rooting for Nick Brown, or are you rooting against him?
I'm rooting for like the law and a return to us, working within our powers, right? The federal government. Here's who I'm rooting for. I'm rooting for Congress to step up and run the powers of the purse string that they have, and not delegate so much authority to other agencies to do their job. I think that's something that we take very seriously here in Washington, and I would love to see the other Washington follow that lead of having a very active legislature that oversees how money is spent.
All right, next we'll go to Carlene Johnson.
Good morning. I was going to ask about the property tax bill, but Jeannie kind of got that. I think I got most of my question about that answered, but I did want to kind of get any of your thoughts on, do you think it's going to fly through this year? It took a pretty significant pushback from the community and people showing up here in Olympia last year to kill the bill last year. So is that going to be what's required again this year? And then I do have a follow-up second question, John, if that's okay, but if you want to respond to that first.
So the bill's certainly taking a different track than it did last year. I think it's going a little bit slower. That said, I would tell you the people of the state of Washington, at least in my district, are no less concerned about property tax than they were a year ago. And whether it passes or not, I expect there to be significant pushback from the public around the state, because this is just one more cost in a state where it's been increasingly unaffordable for working Washingtonians to live. So I expect this to be a real fight, and you got to remember, this is an enormous tax. It scales up to over $10 billion over 10 years, and it compounds more after that. This is a very big tax on the people of the state of Washington in a place they cannot afford it. So we'll see if the majority decides to push it forward. I expect significant pushback from the voters.
And I would say that my constituents are the same as John's constituents, so I'm hearing the same thing. One of the real big concerns, I mean, we talked about it earlier. It's going to be it's a priorities crisis at this point, not a budget crisis. And if a property tax continues increase or an allowance for property tax increase continues, you have to look at the unintended consequences. And we just talked about school bonds and levies failing, and investments in things like emergency levies, and the things that I think a lot of communities want to support and can support, but won't be able to with all the other types of taxes that get layered on top. I mean, there are a lot of folks in the community who are fine with smart investments with their tax money, but these aren't always, and these are more general fund taxes that are going to be levied on them. So it's really painful for so many folks in the community to be able to absorb, death by 1,000 cuts, right? And this is just one more example. I do think that you're going to find a real swell of people coming to Olympia and sharing their opinion in opposition to any additional taxes, especially property tax increase. This is, again, of all the communications I get from Southwest Washington, the number one is taxes are too high, and the number one tax they want cut or reduced is property taxes. They want us to hold the line on that. So I think this bill is completely in the wrong direction, but I do agree with Senator Braun. It's going in a little bit of a different direction than it did in the past, but I think the ultimate response, hopefully, or the ultimate end game is going to be that this bill doesn't advance because the community is support it.
Yeah, I'll in about 3 minutes.
Oh, John, you're not on mute, bud. Carlene, I guess I would just add this. I've been told repeatedly by my Democrat colleagues about how regressive of a state we live in, how this tax system is so regressive and it punishes poor and working Washingtonians. And yet here we are with another tax that will punish poor and working Washingtonians. Apart from one tax proposal they've had this year, all of these taxes are an increase to the working class here in Washington. All of them make life more expensive for working Washingtonians, not better. And this notion that we're just going to continue to levy these things on for quote unquote state programs that have little to no benefit, or in the case of, allowing a local jurisdiction to raise property taxes, it is completely contradictory from their other messages of regressivity. The way you address regressivity in our taxes in our state is to lower them, not continually raise them directly or give permission for others to raise them directly.
Yeah, even it's been a layering is what I've seen in my district. The property tax, even at 1% to 3%, we can't pass even a 1/10 of 1% or 2/10% for important services within the district that would help aid our 911 systems. That failed this last year in one of our jurisdictions. So what we're seeing is a continual layering here in Olympia by the Democrats of taxes, and people, again, are getting fed up. We touched on that earlier with the school bonds being dropped to a simple majority. I think we're going to see a lot of pressures on our school systems, whether it's levies or whether it's bonding, if we keep layering taxes on top.
I just want to add one thing, because somebody just texted me this. The bill in the House, 12,124 signed in against, 139 pro. I think that tells the story.
Did you have a follow-up, Carlene?
I do. Different, kind of back to the parental bill of rights for a quick second. I guess Senator Peterson is kind of walking back his comments about 13-year-olds having total autonomy over healthcare decisions with or without parents' knowledge or consent. I guess he's now saying those comments were taken out of context, which I'm not sure how he can make that claim, because I've seen the verbatim and the video, and President Trump has weighed in, Doge has weighed in on all this stuff now. What do you make is going to happen there? Do you think the undoing of the parental bill of rights is going to go through? And if so, will it take another Let's Go Washington monumental lift, to put it back in place?
I hope they don't try to roll these back. I think it would be wholly inappropriate for them to do it. To Senator Peterson's comments about the mature minor doctrine and 13-year-olds being able to make their own medical decisions, I think it's a clear example of why the law needs and must be changed. We have a bill that's been introduced that would make some reforms to get parents back involved in healthcare decisions for minors. We're talking about 13-year-olds here. And what Senator Peterson said should shock people, that we even have that level of autonomy for minors in our state is insane. And so we should not only should we not obviously gut the parental bill of rights, but we should go look at rolling back these laws that allow kids to make hugely impactful medical decisions without the support or knowledge of their parents. I think that's the real direction, and this should be hopefully a wake-up call for the state that we can do that, and that if we don't do it here on the legislature, maybe a group like Let's Go Washington will represent parents in rolling that back on the state level.
Yeah, and I'll let Senator Brunn have the last word. I just say that the title of that bill is a safer and supportive public education system. That does not happen without parents. Parents are an essential partnership. It is the parents who need to be more involved in the public education for the public education to work and for their trust to be there. And as Senator Dozier said earlier, I mean, that is sometimes why these ballot measures fail, is because there's got to be greater trust and a greater relationship between parents and public education. I want public education to be better. I want it to be successful, and that only happens with parents. This bill creates a greater wedge between parents and what's happening in the classroom. It's the opposite, I think, of what Washington needs right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I can't speak to Senator Peterson's claims that he was taken out of context. The video seems very plain. I don't know how you take that video and put it in a different context where all of a sudden he is supportive of parents and children and parents' rights. It just doesn't fly. But produce the full video and we'll take a look at it. But to the earlier point, what we do see right now, and we know before us, is they've passed a bill. The Democrats have passed a bill off the floor of the Senate that is divisive. It separates children from their parents. It breaks the bond between parents and school districts, and it undermines trust in our public education system. These are all excuse me, these are all bad things and don't serve Washington well. This is bad for kids, bad for parents, bad for school districts, and bad for Washington if they push forward with it.
All right, next we'll go to Mitchell Rowland.
Good morning. I was hoping to ask about a bill that the House Education Committee will be hearing this afternoon, House Bill 1832, which is designed to improve reading and math skills in K-12 schools. I was wondering if either of your caucuses have had a chance to review the bill and if you anticipate supporting it, or if there's another piece of legislation you would consider for K-12 education.
That's a Keaton.
Oh,
that's one of our new. Oh, sorry, that's one of our new freshmen, Representative Keaton, with getting reading coaches involved. I think it's a good bill. I've been pretty supportive of it. I think our caucus is supportive of it, but it's a good bill. I think it just shows that there's a lot of learning loss. This will improve those student performances and success. These are the types of things that I think we need to focus on to help our students. I think this is one of the better bills from our caucus.
Yeah, this is a caucus priority. It is evidence-based. It is about helping kids with structured reading skills and building up. And this is one of those things where, when we hear Superintendent Ragdoll talk about wanting more money for education, this is a targeted investment that will actually help kids and is not just going to, more unnecessary things within a school. So I think this is a great priority for our caucus, and I think, frankly, should be embraced by the legislature to help get our kids back on track.
We haven't seen it yet in the Senate, but everything I've seen of it is a great bill. One thing that Representative Stokesbury always talks about when he talks about education is the need to work on reading, especially prior to, in third grade and before. That reading, you learn to read till third grade and you read to learn after the third grade is what they say. Few things are more important in our public education system than supporting reading at an early age and getting kids off to a great start.
Did you have a follow-up, Mitchell?
No, thank you.
Okay, one last question comes from Albert James, who said he is asking your thoughts on Representative Fye's plan to implement a road usage charge to fund the state's transportation needs. Thoughts on that?
Well, look, there's another regressive tax that's going to hurt working Washingtonians. That bill, I think, has a lot of really bad flaws in it. First and foremost is, obviously a new tax, but beyond that, it's not protected. It's not constitutionally protected, and that's money that can be swept into the general fund. Roads and maintenance preservation is important to our caucus, which is why we have supported common sense spending around our transportation budget. This is just another way to not hold yourself accountable for how spending has been going, in my opinion. And if road preservation and maintenance is a priority, we can do it within existing resources. We don't need to levy yet another regressive tax on the people of the state of Washington.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. This is and frankly, this idea has opposition from both sides of the aisle. I don't see how you count votes and get this through both chambers. On top of the fact that it's regressive, on top of the fact that it's not 18th Amendment protected, on top of the fact that you got to figure a way logistically to do it much harder to implement than our current gas tax system. So there's a number of challenges standing in the way on this proposal, not the least of which is I don't believe there's anywhere close to 50 votes in the House or 25 votes in the Senate to pass it.
All right, let's go to closing remarks, starting with Representative Abarno.
Well, I think, again, I'll end where I started, which is that, in week 5, you're seeing the stark contrast between House Democrats and House Republicans. You're starting to see the greater divide. House Republicans are trying to put together real solutions to fix Washington at the kitchen table, in the classroom, on the streets, in the neighborhoods to keep it safe. And at the same time, we're seeing House Democrats kind of retread the tires of bad policies that didn't pass in the past. And we talked about this. We got a lot of questions about, do you think this bill gets a chance this year? Or do you think this new tax gets a chance this year? We're seeing it over and over again. It was bad a year ago. It was bad 5 years ago. It's still bad today. If it's going to increase the cost of living for our citizens throughout Washington, if it's going to make our streets less safe, if it's not going to improve schools, then we shouldn't be passing it. We should be focusing on the real priorities that the Senate Republicans and House Republicans have, and I think we're going to continue to move forward advancing those plans. But we're still going to be reaching out to a lot of our folks to make sure they have their voices heard here. And I think Senator Braun shared the vote count on 1332 or 34, the property tax bill. People don't want those taxes, so we shouldn't be bringing them back up. We should be reducing the cost of living, not increasing it.
Yeah. Week 5, things are starting to pick up here a little bit. Senate Republicans, we're going to be for things that make our community safer against things that make them less safe. We're going to be for things that make it more affordable in Washington against things that make it less affordable. We're going to be for things that make our public education system, our K-12 public education system, better and deliver the education our children deserve. And we're going to be against things that distract and devalue the public education system. And most basic, we're going to be for a balanced budget, a sustainable budget that doesn't rely on additional taxes on the people of the state of Washington to pay the bill. This is the time when we have to stick to our priorities. Those are our priorities. And we're going to spend the next 11 or 10 and a half weeks, pushing for the best outcome for the state of Washington.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We will be back next Tuesday at the same time.